Morning. Title for this morning is Grab Some Jars. Grab some jars. Bible reading this morning is taken from 2 Kings chapter 4 and verses 1 to 7. And we're just going to read this story. And this is what I'm going to be sharing about this morning. And that's that God will bless our time together. It says, the wife of a man... I'll read it from the... I might not be able to see it from the back. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take away my 2 boys and as his slaves." Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your home?" "Your servant has nothing in there at all," she said, "except a small jar of olive oil." Elisha said, "Go around and ask all your neighbours for empty jars. Don't ask just for a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour all into the jars, and then as each is filled, put it on one side." She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. And when all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is no jar, not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go and sell the oil and pay your debt. You and your sons can live on what is left." I've got to start off this morning with a question. And the question is this: have you ever been rescued? Have you ever been rescued? I want to share a story with you that happened to me very recently. I was on my way to work last Friday, driving on the motorway on my favourite road, the M6, southbound, and the traffic was flowing lovely. And sometimes I listen to the radio, and sometimes I listen to some worship, and sometimes I just switch off the radio and hopefully listen to what God is saying. And on this occasion, I was on my way to Coventry, about 7:20 in the morning, and I turned off the radio, and I was trying to listen to what God was saying, and having a quiet time with the Lord as I was driving along merrily on the M6. And all of a sudden, these words came into my mind on a message that I'd spoken about on a Tuesday in lockdown. And hopefully you'll remember them. Just 5 words. God is good all the time, in every situation, no matter what. God is good. And that just came into my mind as clear as day as I was driving up the M6. Those words were stuck on my heart. And they've been, to be fair, those words have really helped through lockdown. In really difficult situations, when Ellen had COVID at the beginning, those words were really special. When I was really poorly, over 12 months ago now, and was in hospital, those words were really special. And they just came back to me at this particular moment as I was on my journey to Coventry. And as I was driving along, I was in the 3rd lane of the motorway, doing about 60 miles an hour. And in an instant, something suddenly was right in front of me on the carriageway. And right in the middle of my lane was this exhaust pipe and this massive box on this exhaust pipe, right slap bang in the middle of my lane. And a lorry had driven over it in front of me, so it literally was from here, less than that door away, and I got to respond in a second. And I thought, do I swerve to miss it? Do I put my brakes on and try and stop before hitting it? Or do I just hit it? And my first response was, there's no way I'm going to be able to swerve because there's traffic either side of me. I'm in a 4-lane motorway, there's no hard shoulder. I think I'm going to have to hit it. And that's what I did. And I hit this exhaust at about 60 miles an hour, thinking I'll try and get my wheels over so hopefully it'll go underneath and it'll come out the back. But it didn't. And I hit it just to the side of, inside the wheels, and it stuck. It sounded like it was underneath the engine, and it was making the most horrendous noise you've ever heard in your life. I thought it had actually lifted the car up, and I was driving on the exhaust. My first response was, what do I do now? I need to get out of here as quick as possible. And I indicated and tried to pull over. And because it was so busy, the first opportunity I had, when the noise was horrendous, I got over to the inside lane, which wasn't an hard shoulder, but was a live lane. And I saw in the distance a white Land Rover in front of me, and I thought, if I can get behind him, that might help, because he'd already stopped. I didn't know. And so I decided to try and pull in behind this white Land Rover. And I did. I got onto the lane, the inside lane. And then I thought, my next reaction is I've got to get out of this car as quick as possible, because I could see in my mirror there were cars coming up, zooming up behind me, and traffic zooming past me like nothing had happened. And so I jumped out the car as quick as I possibly could. And then I thought, I'll try and get as far away from the car as I could. But literally, there was about that much between the carriageway, and then as I looked over the wall, there was about a 30-foot drop. So I couldn't climb over the fence or the crash barrier. I had to stand about this far, and the traffic was coming up like nothing had happened. And I was obviously a bit concerned that I was in a dangerous situation. And then, to my amazement, my phone was still in the car. I thought, I need to ring somebody, but my phone's in the phone holder in the car, and I thought, I don't really want to go back in the car, so what do I do now? And then, by some miraculous thing, well, not miraculous really, because we've got a God who provides, and a God who knows our problems. Then, as I looked down the carriageway and the cars were coming up into what I thought was going to hit me, an AA recovery van came from nowhere and pulled in about 100 yards behind me. Got out the van, went straight to the emergency phone and rung the traffic police. And I thought, I need to go and speak to this man because I'm in the AA. He might be able to help me out. And so I started walking slowly down the carriageway to where he was. And he'd already rung the traffic police. And I said, he said, what's the problem? And I said, I hit an exhaust at about 60 miles an hour, and it's underneath the car. And he said, okay, you need to put a call in. And I said, well, my phone's in the car. And he said, well, don't go back in the car, try and get it from the passenger side, which I did. But the noise of the traffic was so loud that I just couldn't make a call to the AA. And he said, don't worry about it, I'll sort the situation out. And he was on his way to a job in Leicester, to rescue somebody in Leicester. But when he saw the need I had, I was in a greater need of rescue. And to cut a long story short, His name was Mark, by the way. Mark rescued me, put me on the back of his trailer. I never even made a phone call to the AA. He saw me from a long way off, saw my brake lights, and said, how the two cars behind me didn't run into the back of me, he'll never know. And he said, you couldn't have been in a more dangerous place on the motorway. But God knew. And he rescued me without even making the call, because I was in a dangerous place. That's the first point this morning. God knows our problems. Before we even ask him, he knows the situations we find ourselves in. And in this story that we read, of this lady, there were three things about this family and this woman. First and foremost, there was a despair in the family. The words in that verse said she cried out, or she moaned, she wept uncontrollably, to shriek out in such a way because she was in such a difficult situation. And she came to the man of God at the lowest point in her life, and she was in a desperate strait. The reason? There'd been a death in her family. She was married to one of the sons of the prophets, and these men who were training under Elisha to be prophets and preachers in Israel, this was her husband. This was her lover. This was her friend. This was her provider. This was her protector. This was the one who was her best friend. And she just lost her husband in death. And she was broken. And there's people here this morning who've been in that situation and know the feeling of losing that person who means so much to them. But there was a debt. Her husband had left a debt and a bill that she couldn't pay. And as a result, the creditors were coming for her children, as what they could do in those days, because this was allowed under Jewish law. And so she'd been deprived of her husband. She was about to lose her sons as well. She is over her head in debt, and she doesn't think she's going to make it. But there was a devotion in her family. And in spite of all her problems, she still held firm in the grip of faith that she had, that she needed help. But she also knew not to turn to friends and family, but first and foremost to turn to her God. And so she turned to the man of God to help her. Elisha was in God's representative for her at that time. He was the best hope that she had. And she reminded Elisha that her husband had feared the Lord. And she reminded him that their family had served God. And even though she didn't understand what she was facing, she still believed that God cared and could do something about it in her situation. And so she cried out to him. You know, there's some lessons that we can learn in this story today. First one, at some point, every person in this room is going to come to this point. You're going to arrive at a low point in your life when everything seems to be a problem and everything is going wrong. Some of you might be in that situation even right now, and you've come to the end of your rope. Some of you have already been through it and can testify about it. Others are there today in this position because we all have our troubles and trials. And secondly, when we reach this point, when everything seems to be going wrong, the world, the flesh, the devil will tell you that God doesn't care, that he can't help you. The fact is, he does, and he will, and he sees everything that you're facing even right now, everything that is hidden, and he does care. He cares more about you and about what you're facing right now than you'll ever understand. Thirdly, these verses are there to teach us a lesson about our problems, that we might become closer to God. These are God opportunities in disguise. Therefore, no matter what you're called to face in life and facing right now, turn to the Lord for help. He cares for you. He is able. He will work on your need. God releases our potential. And that's what he does. The Lord chose to involve the widow in her own miracle. First, God erased her faith by forcing her to admit that she didn't have enough. Then God expanded her faith by teaching her to trust, to be humble, and to be obedient. He does the very same thing in our lives too. How does God erase our faith in ourselves? He asked two questions. Elijah asked two questions, and these are the two questions. I ask you these questions this morning. What do you need? What do you have? By those two questions, this woman was made to see the size of her need and the smallness of her resources. She needed everything that she had, and she had very little. She needed much, but she could not possibly meet her own needs. Often God will use trials, heartaches, burdens of life to bring us to a place where he can honestly see our need, and we can see our inability to meet that need. Think about it. As long as we think we can handle things, we won't turn to God. We'll try and do them ourselves. We'll look after ourselves. We don't need the Lord when we can handle our own situations. If we all have the answers, why turn to him in the first place with a question? But when we stop and honestly answer those two questions, we'll realise we need him more than we ever thought we would. God does this to erase our faith. He isn't trying to erase our faith in him. He's trying to erase our faith in ourselves. And as we think we can, he can show us that we can't. How God expands our faith? After God erased her faith in herself and her own abilities, he began the process of expanding her faith in the power of the Lord to meet her need again. He expands our faith personally. What have we got? What have you got this morning? What's your faith like? Elisha asked that question. What's in your house? This was designed to teach this widow that she may not have looked like she should have done, but in reality she already had what she needed to obtain what she wanted. She couldn't see it, but God could, and God had already given her the very thing that she would use to meet that need. Her answer to Elisha was, tell him I have just a small pot of oil. The pot of oil or flask of oil that would be used to anoint was all that she had left in her house, that her husband had left her. That insignificant flask of oil would be the answer to her prayers. What have we got to realise in our lives already that we've got in our lives? Think about it this morning. You're a child of God. You have his promises. He's promised to hear your prayers. He's promised to answer your prayers. He's promised to meet all your needs. You know, we can look at our problems and they can seem so large. We can look at our possessions and they seem so small. Yet we always fail to factor that God is in the business of doing so much more. He places us in these situations where our faith in him needs to be expanded. Does your faith need to be expanded today? He expands our faith. The widow is told in this story to go and borrow empty vessels that she can get as many as she can get her hands on. What a strange command that is. How do you explain how she explained this to her neighbours? And they said, this crazy preacher man's told me to do this. Don't ask me why. I'm flat broke, but God is about to do something that I don't know he's going to do it. But the man of God said, borrow some pots. So she goes round to the different people who live nearby and asks that question, can I just borrow some vases or vessels or pots or pans? Just go and grab some jars. Is God saying to you this morning, go and grab some jars, but don't just grab a few, grab a lot, because God is in the business of providing, and he wanted to expand her faith. How did he expand her faith? He began the process of expanding her faith in the power of the Lord to meet the need again, and he does exactly the same things in our lives. He expands our faith personally. Elisha's second question was this: what have you got? If God is saying that to you this morning, what have you got? What's in your house? She couldn't see it at first, but God was about to give her a great blessing. He was about to fill her pots. He was about to show her his provision and abundance. And he does the same in your life and mine. We have to learn personally. You know, I've been brought up in this church, and I remember Ron, years ago, when I was just a kid, telling the story how God saved him from underneath the van. When that van fell on him, and he told the story how God provided salvation. He needed that. He needed that at that time because he needed to know for himself that God was with him in that moment when he could pass away. Mark, in the same situation, when he fell off that roof, he needed to learn some lessons about God's faith. When I was in hospital over 12 months ago now, I needed that same lesson. Personal. When the rubber hits the road, that's when God meets you and provides. And that's what he needed to do for this woman. She needed to know for herself, not what her husband had done and her family. She needed to know and see God's provision for herself. And that's what he did. You and me are a work in progress. You and me are his billboards advertising his grace and blessing. And we only learn those things when we go through difficult, hard times and situations when God's got to prove himself and show us that he can do that. Can you imagine that scene in the house that day when a mom started getting all these vessels in the house and what the children thought? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? The boy's saying, what's this all about? But there in that home that day, in the privacy of their home when the door was shut, they were going to see God's provision for themselves, because he was going to meet them in that moment, and he was going to provide for them and show them an abundance that he'd got for them, and he wanted them to have. We have to experience things ourselves. We need that personal experience to see God's working in those situations. And that's what happened. It happened for Elijah. It happened for Daniel when he was in the lion's den. It happened for Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego when they were in the fire. It happened for the 5,000 people who were sat in a field waiting for something to eat. It happened for the disciples when they were on a boat and they were about to sink. They needed those experiences to see how God rescued them in that situation. And when the Lord comes through for his people, then you know. But the greatest work is in the child of God when he does it personally for you. And the Lord moves in power. Their faith was expanded and it would never be the same. And I dare say, if Mark hadn't gone through that experience, if Ron hadn't gone through that experience, if I hadn't gone through that experience, my faith wouldn't have been the same. We need those experiences. Paul, the Apostle Paul, he started his journey with this question, these words, "Who are you, Lord?" He didn't even know who God was when he started his journey. By the end of his journey, he was saying this in Acts chapter 9, verse 5. "Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you think, and according to the power that worketh in us." Wow, what a journey he'd gone from. "Who are you, Lord?" I don't know who you are. To the God who can do exceedingly abundantly above anything that you ever ask. And he had to learn that experience. God gives our provision. The lesson she had to learn was the lesson of God's provision. We've got the God of, not the God of getting by, we've got the God of abundance. Anne shared, I listened to the message on the way back home from holiday. His promise still stands. Great is his faithfulness. There is no limit to God's provision. God is able to meet every need, move every mountain, and to solve every problem. Do you believe that? His provision is not limited by our faith. God stands ready to give all that you can make room for in your life, no more or less, if we trust him to take care of us and our vessels and put our vessels under his flow. There is nothing that he can't do. Nothing. Just going to close with a little story. Two men went down to a lake one morning to go fishing, trout fishing. And they stayed there all day. One man had a strange habit. Every time he caught a trout, he would dip into his bag, pull out a ruler and measure it. If the trout was longer than the ruler, he'd chuck it back. Strangely enough, he did this all day long. Every time the trout was bigger than the ruler, he threw it back. By the end of the day, his partner said to him, "I can't stand this any longer. I've never seen a man fish like this before in my life." He said, every time you caught a trout, a small one, you kept it. Every time you caught a big one, you threw it back. The man said, yeah. Why did you do that? The man said, I only have an 8-inch frying pan. Think about that. Rather than change the frying pan, he threw the fish back. And you know, we've got a God of abundance, and often we settle for 8-inch faith, and he's got 12 inches. Think about that. A God of abundance. How big is your faith? We've got a God who provides. He provided a rescue for me on the motorway last week. But more importantly, he provided a rescue from hell for me at Calvary. And he's provided a rescue for you. Have you taken that opportunity? Because I had a debt I couldn't pay, and he paid it full. Just like that AA man come to rescue me on the side of the motorway and get me to a place of safety because I was in danger. He came and got me from a place of danger to a place of safety and a place in glory. Because that's the God he is. Because he's the God who never changes. He's the God whose mercies new every morning. And he will never stop being faithful and good and strong and true to his children. God is good all the time, every situation, no matter what. God is good.